Okay, so we're going to take a quick look at the Sarvatobhadra Chakra. It's first mentioned in the Kavi Narpati in the text known as Narpati Jayacharya Swarodaya. So this was considered super secret stuff, and interestingly, this is actually easy to find now, but it's still kind of a big secret. I won't get too much into that. This video is mostly for the purpose of getting this information down for later review for me, so hopefully it doesn't close by the time I'm finished. But it's called the Trailokya Deep, which lights all three lokas and is the most auspicious of the chakras and charts. It's very interesting. It's kind of a grid. It's different than traditional horoscopes. So let's kind of dive into this. Oh wow, so after its initial recording, a lot of scholars such as Phaladipika mentioned this, so that's actually a pretty foundational Vedic astrology texts. And it's used for tracking transits, planetary influences, and forecasting like natural events and human fortunes. So the Sarvatobhadra Chakra, or the SBC, is constructed using a 9x9 grid containing 81 squares. This is what is used to keep track of transiting planets that cast aspects or Vedas onto specific letters, constellations, and signs. So this is combining sound, nakshatra, and Rashi. Here's a brief format on how the 81 squares are mapped out in a concentric layered format starting from the outermost edge and moving toward the center. The four corners of the 9x9 grid are reserved for the vowels that anchor the chart. So the top left is A, top right is I, bottom right U, bottom left Re. The outermost ring, or the remaining 28 squares along the very outer border, hosts the 28 nakshatras, which means it's including the Abhijit nakshatra. And they run in a clockwise direction starting from the top, so that means they go to the right. So the top row is Kritika to Ashlesha, the right is column is top to bottom is Magadha Anurada, bottom row is Jeshta to Shravana, left column is Dhanishta to Bharani. The inner rings is the zodiac Rashis and the Tithis. It's very interesting that it's mentioning the Tithis here. So as you step one layer inward toward the center, the squares are populated with the swaras, which are, the consonants, the Sanskrit sounds, placed systematically behind the nakshatras to represent the first letter of a person's name or a city's name. The 12 zodiac signs are placed further inward, mapping Taurus through Aries to specific quadrants. The Tithis, which are lunar days, this part of lunar calendar, are the very central squares. They are grouped into Nanda, Bhadra, Jaya, Rikta, and Purna. And the days of the week. So briefly, Jaya means victory, yada yada. We'll get into that later. So this is how the transiting planets interact with the chart. Once a person's birth nakshatra, name, consonant, and Rashi are located on the grid, the current positions of the transiting planets are mapped onto their respective nakshatras. Planets then cast Vedas, or cross-sectional glances, or obstructions across the grid lines. Every planet transiting a square casts 3 types of glances simultaneously. Vama is left, Daksha is right. Samuha Veda, frontal horizontal, a straight line striking directly across to the opposite side of the grid. Vama Veda, left diagonal. Diagonal line shooting across to the left. Daksha Veda. Diagonal line shooting across to the right. This is actually interesting because it's giving you like specific, it's almost like a laser coming from the planets. So according to this, the nature of the planets and impact of a Veda depends entirely on whether the transiting planet is naturally benefic or malefic. So briefly speaking, malefic transits strike a sensitive square like your name or birth nakshatra or both. They can cause, obviously, obstacles, delays, health issues, etc. Benefic ones do the opposite. They give you gains, unlock opportunities, peace of mind. And then special planetary states are taken into consideration, such as if it's retrograde or Vakri, which is extra powerful. So this is a really big insight into how retrograde planets work. Fast moving or Tivita can also cast a stronger glance. Retrograde does it towards the right, Tivita to the left. So, how you locate a name letter on the grid is briefly outlined here. So the consonants or aksharas are placed in the inner ring, right, adjacent to the outer nakshatras. They're arranged systematically so that each letter aligns with a specific direction and group of stars. And this is mentioned, like when you're reading about nakshatras, like it tells you that they have a direction that they look at. So this is actually super interesting. But anyways, to find a name letter, you look at the inner borders of the grid, corresponding to the directions, right? So there's a grid, northwest, south, east. Okay. The north border is Kavarga letters. East is Chavarga and Tavarga. South is Tavarga and Pavarga. Western is semivowels and sibilants such as Yara, Lava, Sha, Sa, Ha. But anyways, once you find the letter of a person or city, the square becomes a highly sensitive trigger point whenever a transiting planet passes by or shoots a line toward it. So here's a brief article on Pancha Veda. So when a single transit strikes 5 vital points on your chart, this is pretty heavy stuff. Obviously Pancha means 5. And then Veda is like, glance or laser, pierce, blah blah. You get it. So there's Nakshatra, Akshara, Rashi, Swara, and Tithi. This is way more specific, but anyways. The Nakshatra star and the Akshara, the Rashi, Swara, or anchor vowel, and the Tithi, or Varna, all combine here to tell you about the impact of the 5 energetic pillars. Which is kind of interesting because, Venus is also 5, and that's another deep thing to get into, right? The 5 major senses, the pentagram has 5, etc., etc. But anyways, there's also Lata, but I'll get into that later. Anyway, so let's say your name is using a Latin cipher, right? Because you speak English. To translate this, you would have to first convert the name into its Sanskrit phonetic sounds, rather than looking at the spelling. So it's not so much about the spelling. This is based on sounds. So accent is a very important thing to consider and account for. But anyways, the chakra reacts strictly to the vibration of the spoken voice. So obviously here I pronounce it with the hard G sound, Gilbert. So that'd be the northern border, meaning that you ignore these two. I'm going to show them anyway in the video, just for later research purposes. But anyways, here it's also incorporating the I for some reason, Gilberto. I don't know why it's doing that. It doesn't explain much, so I'll have to revise this later. So now that we have that, you can check your phonetic letter square and check the real-time planets. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. We could probably reverse engineer that, but we'll keep on reading. So you look at a Panchang or an ephemeris, and then out of the 28 nakshatras, you see which of the planets are moving through where, right? Which you could find, obviously. We'll use different things such as Didik Panchang, not just Astro Sage. Pretty sure Jyotish app has it as well in Cosmic Insights, Jagannath Hora, etc. And then you find the squares of the transit planets on the outer ring of the chart. Right? So look, if Mars is transiting Critica, you find the Critica square on the ring. And then you trace the glances. So from the planet's square, draw 3 imaginary lines across the 9x9 grid. Straight down across is horizontal or Samuha. Diagonal left is Vama. Diagonal right is Daksha. Pretty straightforward, right? And then you read the results. So if any of those 3 lines crash directly into your name letter, you are under a Veda or planetary aspect. Obviously, Jupiter, Venus, good stuff. Rahu, Saturn, in particular, really tough. And yeah, there you go. So that is a quick example. So here, I'm going to use my Janma Nakshatra, which is Satabisha. So we could obviously look at if there's anything in Satabisha, and then you look at the grid. And because this is the anchor point, that's kind of like where you would start, and then you go outward from there. Obviously, it's going to sit on the western or outer border because of how it's categorized, right? And not just that, you can also check other transits, right? So combining Satabisha in the western border with your phonetic first letter, right, which is the top row, and then it's got a little bit of the right and the left. It starts to get a lot more specific. And yeah, that summarizes it. So there's a double strike warning, Panchaveda component. If a heavy planet like Saturn, Rahu, Mars is transiting a nakshatra that shoots a straight or diagonal line hitting both Satabisha and your name square letter at the same time, you will feel an immediate bottleneck. Whereas benefics could be a shield. And step 3, modern day shortcut, because it's plotting an 81 square grid by hand. Tracing lines can be highly tedious, so modern astrologers use digital calculators. And that's what I was saying earlier, you know, I'm pretty sure Jagannath Hora has it. So it's very convenient and useful to have and can help you read this. So that's pretty cool. I'll have to check that later. And we'll have to physically try it, right? So you get your Swarodaya tool, you enter your details, and you look at the resulting grid. And pretty much now that you have the grid and the name, then you can, you know, use other references such as, you know, again, a Panchang calculator, or just see the transits, and now you have what to look for. So pretty cool stuff. And again, you know, like this is also mentioning Tithi, so this is very great for, you know, checking things for people and also for the masses, not just individuals. So looking at the 3 worlds, like I feel like mentioning that again. So yeah, rather than traditional moon signs or other classic Vedic systems, this shifts it from a broad and general approach to a highly targeted or personalized evaluation. Wow. So in traditional systems, astrology looks at your Rashi, right? And if you only track Rashi transits, anyone with a Sagittarius moon or Aquarius moon can have the same horoscope, but by focusing on Satabisha or Purvashada versus just the Rashi, the chakra here can zoom into a tiny 13-degree arc of the sky, which allows you to isolate your specific energetic blueprint out of the much larger generalized zodiac population. Also, it's important mentioning the symmetrical 28 star grid versus the standard 27 grid system. So standard Vedic astrology does ignore Abhijit for, regular stuff like transits and things like that. And it's actually mentioned by Pandit Sanjay Rath that, like there's a spiritual purpose behind that. Because of how the chakra works though, the Sarvatobhadra chakra, it mandatorily includes Abhijit. So the inclusion of this alters the mathematical geometry of the sky. So the standard one uses a trigonal calculation. 27 can be cleanly divided by 3 and 9. But the SBC realigns it into a rectangular 4x7 matrix. And I want to look into the numbers of this, right? So there's obviously, numerical esotericism behind this, right? 4x7, like this is a pretty important number, right? We've seen the 47 before in Isopsophy and Katapayadi, so I'll bring that up later. But because it is right next to Uttarashada, just a step away from Purvashada, its presence completely changes how transit lines cross the chart. A planet transiting nearby will strike downstream coordinates it entirely differently on an 81 square grid than it would on a standard 27 star method. Very interesting stuff here. So laser beam Vedas versus broad house Drishtis. In standard astrology, planets influence you using Drishti, right? So like aspect from Saturn is always 3, 7, and 10. The SBC uses Veda, piercing or obstruction. If a malefic planet is transiting Purvashada, it acts like a laser beam. It shoots 3 distinct geometric paths across the matrix, which we talked about already, right? Rather than casting a white blanket over an entire house or sign. It targets individual coordinates with exact mathematical precision. It's also pairing this acoustically, right? So your star mixed with your name, it's going to be very different than just the chart by itself. So this is the single biggest difference. In a traditional Rashi transit, your name doesn't matter, only your birth chart does. The Sarvatobhadra chakra is a hybrid of astronomy and phonetics. The grid interlocks your Janma Nakshatra or birth star directly with the acoustic vibration of your name. So if a tough planet transits through the sky, it might strike through your birth star, but completely miss your name letter. This is important, right? Because if it's doing that, the real world impact is heavily diluted. A true crisis or massive success only triggers when both your star and phonetic sound are struck simultaneously. This is the basis of Panchaveda. So yeah, I'll go ahead and end it here. Let's see how it worked out. Hopefully this video is a success.